Two identical twins, indistinguishable in face and voice, grew up in a world most could never imagine. Born into hardship and hardship alone, Pedro and Margarito Flores were shaped by an environment where survival was the only law, long before they became infamous for their role in one of the most consequential cooperation deals in the history of American law enforcement. They were just two boys in a tough neighborhood, learning quickly that the world did not reward kindness. Their father had spent time in prison when they were very young, leaving a void that echoed through their childhood. It left them with questions they couldn't ask and choices they believed they had to make. That early absence planted a seed of self-reliance, but also a hunger for power and money that would define their lives. Those twin impulses, forged in poverty and abandonment, ultimately led them down a path that would make them billions of dollars with one of the world's most notorious drug lords, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán. From humble beginnings to early crimes. Pedro and Margarito Flores grew up in a working-class neighborhood of Los Angeles where gangs weren't unusual. They were part of daily life. In an area where opportunity was scarce and danger was ever present, peer influence was as strong as family ties. The Flores twins were charismatic and sharp-witted, but most importantly, they were survivors. It wasn't long before they graduated from hustling small corners and corner shops to working with local street crews. Their first known exposure to the law came when they were teens and were involved in petty thefts and the distribution of stolen goods. While it never would be considered anything out of the ordinary on paper, it was to be the start of a premier lesson. Profit was possible, and risk was rewarded. Their first taste of drugs, both as sellers and consumers, came shortly after. Street-level cocaine circulated in the neighborhood, and, like many young men before them, they were drawn to it not just as users, but as traders. What started as a way to earn extra cash became an obsession, not only for the money but for the power and respect it brought. That moment marked the beginning of something far darker and far more profitable than they could have ever imagined, building an empire in the shadows. However, the true turning point in the life of the Flores brothers was the realization that they were not only good at moving those drugs out there, but they were also excellent at it, having the skills not only to navigate the logistics but also to build strong networks, which enabled Pedro and Margarito Flores to set up an operation that covered more than one state in the U.S., from being mere dealers to becoming distributors. As their influence grew, so did their ambitions. Eventually, they came to attract the attention of some narcotics dealers interested in doing business within the states and finding reliable people to partner with locally. Mexican cartels, at this particular time, were expanding their influence within the U.S., and they needed people they could rely on to facilitate their activities within American borders. The Flores brothers were an ideal choice for this. They were daring, effective, and wealthy. However, their ascent accelerated when they made contact with Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel and one of the most feared drug lords in history. El Chapo had built a sprawling international network, but he needed reliable and competent lieutenants in major U.S. cities. Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, and New York were key to his strategy, and he took the Flores brothers on board. Initially, however, it was a mutually transactional relationship. El Chapo's organization supplied product in exchange for distribution and protection services. However, unlike other groups in the area, the Flores brothers did not earn their reputation merely on their competence. It was also about loyalty and secrecy. In a world where loyalty could get you killed, they had a reputation for secrecy and strategic thinking. Gradually, they gained trust that very few Americans ever managed. With El Chapo's backing, their empire exploded. The billion-dollar business. By the mid-2000s, the Flores brothers were no longer small-time middlemen. They were big players in the global illicit drugs trade. Their network was an efficient operation that spread across at least half a dozen states. They coordinated production runs, managed complex transportation routes, and negotiated payments in multiple currencies, What had started with small amounts of cocaine in Chicago had grown into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Money moved from shell companies, real estate investments, nightclubs, and luxury vehicles. The Flores brothers lived a life most people only see in movies, of private jets, designer clothing, and exclusive parties. Yet, unlike most drug lords who wanted to smoke their success in the public eye, the Flores twins, while unashamedly fashionable, lived with an element of caution that made them highly effective and highly elusive, with encrypted phones, coded meetings, and surgical strikes. Their level of operation was so massive that they were no longer moving kilos. They were now moving tons of these illicit drugs. The DEA once estimated that at peak operating capacity, the Flores organization was responsible for distributing thousands of kilograms of cocaine and heroin into the U.S. The profitability of their operation was in the hundreds of millions and, by some estimates, in the billion-dollar range. However, their success was soon going to be short-lived. Law enforcement in several states began to notice a strange and curious spike in high-purity cocaine shipments, and they were all from the Flores operation. The rise of a double life. Though they were infamous, Flores brothers were also masters of disguise, and to most people, they were nothing more than legitimate businessmen who owned nightclubs and real estate properties and were active members of society. To most, this was life, and it was not all about business and solving equations, but about negotiations, not about signing deals, but about negotiating loyalty, fear, and existence. Loyal to El Chapo, but not blind to his leadership, the brothers knew when to negotiate, defer, and assert influence. They began issuing orders on their own and making crucial operational decisions without consulting Mexican leadership. They weren't just foot soldiers, they were generals. So powerful had they become that other cartels began to avoid direct conflict with the Flores organization, preferring to negotiate than escalate. Their reputation as negotiators and enforcers was infamous. There were instances when, upon seeing the other cartels attempting to encroach on their territories, the others found themselves either outmaneuvered or threatened into retreat. This was the world of shadows, of hidden allegiances and threats of every kind, and the Flores brothers operated within this world with ease and sophistication. Turning informant, betrayal and reckoning. The brothers were aware of the risk. They knew that law enforcement was closing in. But in the dangerous world they had built, there was no easy way out. And then came the moment that changed everything, the choice to flip. Faced with potential life sentences and mounting pressure, Pedro and Margarito made a decision that would shock the criminal world. They agreed to cooperate with the Drug Enforcement Administration and become informants against El Chapo and the Sinaloa Cartel. It was the most consequential decision of their lives, and one of the most consequential in the history of the U.S. drug war. Once loyal to the cartel hierarchy, Pedro and Margarito had chosen self-preservation through cooperation with U.S. authorities. It wasn't just a flip, it was a calculated strike against the very network that had made them powerful and wealthy. Undercover recordings, intercepted communications, and testimony from within, furnished to law enforcement by the brothers, afforded them an unprecedented level of access to the ruling elite within the cartel. For the first time, prosecutors gained verifiable, first-hand testimony about high-level dealings within the cartel, including the whereabouts and activities of some of the world's most wanted men, including El Chapo himself. Pedro and Margarito Flores were sentenced to federal prison, but their cooperation reduced what would have been decades-long sentences. They entered a witness protection program, relocated with new identities, and effectively vanished from public view. Their names, once synonymous with power and fear in the drug trade, became whispers of caution and controversial legacy. Their legacy is paradoxical. On one hand, they made billions working with one of the most violent cartels in the world. On the other, their cooperation helped dismantle major parts of that organization. Some see them as traitors to their former world. Others see them as key figures who helped reduce violence and chaos by giving law enforcement the tools they needed. The story of Pedro and Margarito Flores is a dramatic tale of rise, power, betrayal, and consequence. From beguiling twins in a tough neighborhood, they ascended to the heights of power within the American drug trade, touching the world of one of its most powerful leaders, El Chapo. They made billions, commanded respect, and navigated a world most people could never imagine. But at the peak of their power, they faced a choice that few ever truly understand. To protect themselves and their future, they chose to cooperate with the very authorities they once fought to evade. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story as gripping as we did, make sure to like and share it with anyone who loves real-life crime sagas. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the shocking stories hidden in the shadows of history, where loyalty, money, and betrayal collide.